afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. For decades, we've been told that America needs more young people studying STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In recent years, there have been encouraging signs. Colleges and universities have reported more young people studying STEM. But now colleges are seeing a new problem. The young people in a STEM major are not sticking with it. Studies show that roughly 40% of students planning STEM majors end up switching to other subjects or failing to get any degree at all. The University of Vermont is taking action and is teaming up with the National Science Foundation to find ways to retain STEM students. To find out more, I'm joined by Jim Vigoureau. Jim is a former chair of the UVM Biology Department and is now Associate Provost. Thanks so much for coming in. Why are young college students leaving STEM majors?
Well, in reality, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that's been around since as long as I've been around in science, which is almost 3 decades now, in science education, I should say. What's new is the spotlight that's been put on it. And I trace that back to 2012, when a report from President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology gave a projection that in 10 years there would be a shortage of about 1 million STEM graduates.
Are there ways that this trend can be turned around?
Yes, there is, because the problem is not new. We've known about it for decades. And one of the main issues is that what we see is that there really hasn't been much change in the way science is taught. If you look back, I went to school in the 1970s, and the science curriculum, specifically in the line sciences, which is my area, is not changed very much since then, even though the material that we teach and the students that we teach have changed substantially.
So you played a key role in acquiring a grant for UVM from the National Science Foundation to look at retaining students in STEM majors, and that was a big deal.
Yes. Well, when we look at the data, what we see is that the majority of the students who leave STEM disciplines, they do so in their first or second year. Once they pass that halfway mark, the retention rate and the graduation rate increases tremendously. So what we have to do is to look at what's happening in that first year or 2 years at turning students away from science. And what we see is that students in the first year, they take foundational courses. Specifically in the life sciences, they have to take courses in chemistry, they have to take courses in physics, they have to take courses in math and statistics. And they come into school thinking, I want to study biology because that's what I like. Why am I studying chemistry? Why am I studying math? And the main problem has been that we haven't been successful in helping them make the connection, in trying to make them understand how understanding math and learning chemistry and physics is important for life sciences education. So
you created a course called BioFab Lab, which starts with students designing their own experimental instruments. Let's take a look.
A new class at the University of Vermont is giving first-year students a decidedly different kind of experience.
We had to build this thing called a bioreactor for a rat lung because they're working on this thing where they're trying to resell different organs with so say I needed a lung transplant, they'd be able to take someone else's cells out of it and put mine into it.
The students are working in groups to come up with solutions for a problem they were presented with in the beginning of the class.
We have been assigned to provide an environment for plankton that they can eat algae.
It's a biology class, but with a twist.
We saw a real place for this sort of maker movement in biology, not to necessarily do biological experiments, but to build equipment to do experiments.
It's called BioFab Lab, and it's offered to first-year, first-semester students who want to explore a biology or life science major. Much of their work is done here at the Generator, a makerspace in Burlington where the students learn how to use 3D printers, laser cutters, and other specialized machines to create their designs. Andy Mead teaches the class.
The idea of the class is to expose those students to a side of doing science that they wouldn't get exposed to until much later in the process. It's sort of a kind of creative side of doing science. No, it's got to be the same because these all have to be total length of exactly the same, right?
Mead says that often, when a researcher wants to do an experiment, they must first construct a dedicated piece of equipment to be able to continue. The projects being created here are more than just an exercise. These devices are needed by labs right here at UVM.
Right now, I've actually got an experiment going on where I'm looking at the impact of elevated temperature on the different life history stages of copepods.
Lauren Ashlock is getting her PhD in biology. Her focus is evolutionary biology, specifically the tiny crustaceans called copepods that are stored in these bins. Ashlock realized that a new piece of equipment could help with her experiments.
I was reading a lot of papers on doing feeding experiments with copepods, and a tool came up again and again called a plankton wheel, and I didn't know what a plankton wheel was, so I Googled it, and it came up with an image of a Hot Wheels car with plankton from SpongeBob on it. And that wasn't quite it, so I had to do some more digging, but essentially it rotates your samples to keep everything in solution, kind of to mimic ocean flow in a lab environment.
Ashlock knew that building this kind of machine would be a big undertaking, so when the opportunity to work with the BioFab Lab class came up, she jumped on it.
Time and resources are huge. You know, it costs money for the materials, but also for the expertise in, laser cutting and 3D printing and all of these things that I'm certainly not an expert in. And having the students really take that on and, claim ownership over that project, I could see it got them very excited, but also for me, definitely reduced, the labor and, mental input that I had to put into doing something like that. So I was able to continue with the research I'm doing now, knowing that they're making this awesome tool for me to do an experiment in the future.
Building a piece of working machinery is a daunting task, especially for students who are still undecided about their future in science.
At first, I even left the class because it seemed like so much work, but then I ended up coming back the same day. I went to the advising center and got switched back into it because I was actually kind of excited to see where the project that we were building would possibly go.
The early part of the semester is spent learning how to brainstorm and coming up with as many ideas as possible.
One of the keys of brainstorming is that you don't eliminate any ideas at first, during the first pass. You write down everything you can possibly think of, as silly as it might be. Because even silly ideas might have some good idea hiding behind them.
Even things that might just seem like a pipe dream at first could actually be useful later on. So honestly, that it's not just for this. That's definitely a useful skill that can be used throughout in pretty much any subject where you have to use critical thinking skills, where you have to really think on your own without the help from others.
The class is funded by a 2-year grant from the National Science Foundation, or NSF. That group is interested in whether this hands-on approach will attract more students to science-based fields.
There are two aims of the grant. One is to identify aspects of the maker movement that work really well for students to learn basic concepts, and the other is to ask whether or not this approach increases attraction to and retention in life sciences.
For UVM, one goal is to use information gathered from the students to better serve those who are thinking about a future in science.
That's really kind of changed my experience, how I think about designing things in college so far.
It's definitely made me rethink about my major. I love physics and I think it's a really cool path, but the reason I value mechanical engineering more is because it's so much broader, and I could be doing something with biology, or I could be doing something in the medical field, I could be doing something with space, and that's kind of what I like about it.
It's a new opportunity for UVM students to get creative close to home. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gullen with Across the Fence.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm in the studio now with UVM Associate Provost Jim Vigoro. So everything that we saw on the video earlier has to do with sort of math and science, but English department also has a connection to this. Tell me about that.
Well, the English department comes in because we've known for a long time that problem-solving learning really works. Students become engaged and they learn concepts when they're trying to solve a problem. But what we don't really know is how they learn during the problem-solving process. So we recruited Livy Miles, who's a professor in the English department and also the director of the writing program. And she's going to help us analyze the information that we gather from this course. Specifically, one of the things that we're doing is we're asking students to keep a journal of their experience through the course, not only recording their daily activities, but also reflecting on how those activities influence their learning process. So Livy has designed a log that the students keep, and she's going to help us using her qualitative analytical skills to extract the information from there to really understand what aspect of this experience it really contributes to the learning process.
Which is really just as much a part of the process as the students making things.
Absolutely, because we want to know what is it that works. Is it when they're brainstorming about the problem? Is it when they get their hands on and start pulling things together, breaking things? Is it when they go back home and reflect on what they did during the day? Is it when they're sitting in the classroom listening to the instructor? We don't know when the real aha moment happens.
Now that you've run the class a couple of times, what are some of the feedback and the response that you've gotten from students?
Well, we've collected a lot of data and information. We're not yet at the stage where we have analyzed that information, so we don't really know, but we do have a treasure trove of information. But what we know sort of from talking to students and observing their behavior in the class is that it's a little bit like the science process is kind of messy. It's a little bit like sausage making, where it's not a straight linear process from formulating a hypothesis to coming up with results and conclusions and explanations. It really is a very convoluted process. And students get a queasy feeling about this because when they come to college, they come to learn. And we put them in an environment where we ask them to try things that are going to fail. 9 out of the 10 things they try will fail. They're thinking, perhaps I'm not using my time correctly and I'm not really learning because I'm failing a lot. But that's part of the process. So that's been a learning experience for them as well as for us, because what we have discovered is that we really need to put some incentives and need to put some rewards early and often. So students feel like they're making progress even though the project itself may be encountering some roadblocks, which is perfectly normal.
It is normal. I mean, that's what real life is all about.
Exactly.
So is it fair to say this is not just a class, but it's really an experiment?
Absolutely. It is an experiment. And in fact, the National Science Foundation, which is funding this class, it's expected this to be an experiment. When we wrote the proposal, it was written as a scientific project with hypotheses, specific aims, methods, data analysis. So it is an experiment.
And so one aspect of the class is working at the generator space in Burlington, which we saw, and interacting with the community there. Why is that piece so important?
Well, because the maker movement really has captivated the community at large. And the National Science Foundation was interested in finding out if that sort of environment was enticing to bring more students into the STEM disciplines, and also if there are aspects of that movement that can contribute to learning, STEM learning.
And so what happens once this grant ends?
We're very confident that this course will go on. As we pointed out earlier, it is an experiment, so it will go through a number of iterations until we get it right. And once we get it right, we're confident that it will become part of the curriculum.
Do the students realize what a critical role they're playing in developing the next generation of curriculum?
That's a very good question. My sense is that some of them do and some of them don't. And the reason I say that is because since this is an experiment and essentially we're experimenting on humans, we have to go through a process that requires approval for doing experimentation in humans. Albeit that experimentation is simply asking them to answer questions and do surveys. So it's nothing like too intrusive. But they have to go through that training, so they are aware that they're taking part in an experiment.
And learning from it.
And learning from it.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.